Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about a neighbor who claimed to be the new owner. When I met Everett in my second week at our former company, I thought he was eccentric, aloof, and not threatening. I supported a smaller department then. Salesman Everett was always moving. He stopped by the break room and nodded politely, sometimes complaining about tight deadlines or impossible quotas. It was surprising that our casual relationship would shake my home to its core. Before I get into the wild details of what happened recently, let me tell you about myself and how I got here. My son Gabriel and daughter Mia make me proud. I've been married to Charlotte for over a decade. Despite daily arguments about laundry piles and who forgot to run the dishwasher the night before, we're close. Overall, people think we're a well-organized family. My parents taught me to work hard, be kind, and plan ahead. They always told me, never compromise your principles just for a bigger paycheck. Ironically, that was one of our biggest differences at work. His initial character wasn't bad, but we disagreed on corporate ethics. That company was mid-sized when I started. It focused on technology support. I worked on a small team that wrote technical manuals, provided phone support, and fixed things behind the scenes. However, Everett worked in sales, which thrived on new deals, office visits, and client acquisition. He wasn't my manager or coworker, but we worked in the same building and saw each other often. I acknowledged his half-smile with a nod. We rarely talked during those first 2 years, except for lunch breaks if we were together. 3 years after I started, the company restructured. My small department merged with another, laying off some, hiring others, and transferring others. I saw growth potential. The company offered me a position leading a small technical team that worked closely with product development. I got a small raise, but more importantly, it gave me new tasks that fit my skills. The sales shakeup was reportedly quite turbulent, but Everett also had some department changes. His manager was results-oriented and didn't understand personal issues or complex client negotiations. Since Everett and I weren't close, I only heard office gossip. After a few years, I saved enough to buy a house in a nice suburb 30 minutes from work. Ironically, Everett moved into the neighborhood at the same time. The homes were different, but similar in style and size. When we pulled into my new home's driveway and saw a familiar face across the street wrestling with moving boxes, we realized we were neighbors by chance. Our wives waved politely, and we had a brief neighborly conversation about how funny it was that we lived in the same development. Everything seemed normal for a while. If we left our houses at the same time, we might see each other in the mornings or at the grocery store on weekends. Knowing someone in the area was initially nice. Everett's nephew visited my kids occasionally. Everett occasionally asked for help with landscaping tricks or contractor recommendations. Occasionally, Charlotte would make too much food and we would offer him a small plate. Thanks, take the dish, and done. No real closeness, but easy neighborliness. Something changed over time. It started slowly. Maybe Everett was just stressed at work. Colleagues told me Everett's sales weren't meeting targets. His performance improvement plan was underway. Management was stricter. I saw him pacing on his lawn some evenings, talking into his phone in a quiet but intense voice. I learned he was fired for missing key metrics over multiple quarters. Really felt for him. Getting fired is hard, especially if you depend on a steady job. A mortgage could be a burden quickly. I didn't expect his animosity toward me at the time. After all, I had no control over his performance and we had never worked together. But Charlotte's description of Everett glaring at her while she was unloading groceries was the first sign of trouble. Despite feeling uncomfortable, she tried to ignore it. A few days later, I saw Everett's mailbox full of envelopes, likely bills and notices. I texted him as a good neighbor to offer to help or keep his mailbox from overflowing if he was away. I thought he was slumping because he never responded, not pushed. Friday afternoon, things escalated dramatically. I drove home from a long shift. My job had gotten harder over time, but it was stable and gave me a good life. I parked in the driveway, grabbed my work backpack, and went inside. I was shocked to find the door locked from the inside with the chain slid in. I tried to use my key, confused. It locked the door, but the chain prevented me from opening it. I saw Everett inside my house through the gap. I froze, doubting my eyes. In my living room was my neighbor who had never visited except for a barbecue years earlier. I jiggled the door again, this time calling, "Everett? What are you doing there?" My heart raced. I thought something terrible happened. Maybe he was having a breakdown. His voice was bitter, like I had never heard it before. "You can't come in here, Tristan. This is my home. I deserve this house more than you." Shocked, I looked around for a rational explanation. could have been delirious. It was a stretch to think property lines were confusing. I said, "Everett, this is my home. My wife and kids live here. Please open the door." I tried to stay calm despite my panic. Where was Charlotte? Where were kids? He shouted that he'd earned the right to live in a house like mine, but his incompetent bosses and backstabbing co-workers, apparently referencing me though I had no role in his firing, had taken everything from him. He claimed he was reclaiming what life owed him. He said I was always undeservedly successful. Then he shouted, evicting me. He even said he was evicting me, the homeowner. I didn't know if he was armed. I desperately tried to call Charlotte while knocking. I breathed a sigh of relief when she answered, but she was confused too. She and the kids had a small gathering at her sister's house that evening. They left earlier that afternoon so they couldn't see it. Thank goodness. At least they were safe. So Everett wouldn't hear me, I whispered to Charlotte. She immediately requested a return. She should stay away until I resolved this, I told her. I threatened to call the police if Everett stayed. That approach was correct, she agreed. My emotions were anger, fear, and disbelief. How had my distant but harmless neighbor gotten a key to my house? Did he pick a lock or find a spare key I forgot to hide? All possibilities raced through my head. I begged him to wake up through the door gap. He was clearly irrational. He put his face so close to the door gap that I could see his feverish eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," he said monotonously. "You deserve nothing. This big house, your family, that fancy car should be mine, I accept." At that point, I realized negotiation was futile. My next step was calling police. I left the porch, called 911, and said my neighbor had illegally entered my home and refused to let me in. The dispatcher was incredulous but promised an officer would arrive soon. It was surreal to make that call. The occasional speeding ticket was my only legal encounter. It was bizarre to explain that someone was in my house refusing to let me in. I called my two-house-down neighbor friend Cheryl while waiting for the police. When Charlotte and I had dinner with her, she was always helpful in a crisis. She told me she was coming but advised me to stay away in case Everett was unstable. She arrived within minutes and waited with me in the driveway, occasionally looking nervously at my front door. Everett shouldn't hurt himself or damage anything, I prayed. The situation became increasingly absurd over time. The first police car arrived and two officers got out, hands near their belts, ready for anything. I explained that I was the homeowner and that my neighbor was inside without permission. They knocked, introduced themselves, and asked Everett outside. I heard him yell that the rightful owner was inside and refused to open the door. Officer turned to me to confirm I owned the property. I gave them my ID and any requested documents. Next, the officers spoke calmly through the door, telling Everett he could avoid serious charges by coming out peacefully. He kept complaining about being fired, the system being rigged against him, and how I had manipulated my way to success. The officer's expression suggested he'd seen many standoffs, but this was probably the strangest. A second patrol car arrived after 15 minutes, and the officers surrounded the house to prevent Everett from escaping through a back window. They carefully placed themselves near the back porch, garage, and front door. Finally, they forced entry to remove Everett. Although I was terrified of the potential damage, I knew there was no other way. One officer used a special tool to pry the door open wide enough to break the chain, then charged in with flashlights and caution. From outside, I couldn't see what happened, but I heard shouting, scuffling, and "Get down!" Officers soon handcuffed and led Everett out. He mumbled, "This is a setup," throughout. He never deserved that job. I know he never earned that house. I watched him in a daze, angry and pity. The look on his face showed he believed I had wronged him. I had done nothing like that. As I tried to make sense of it all, one of the officers took my statement and reassured me that I had called the police correctly. They also told me Everett would be charged with trespassing, burglary, or attempted home invasion, depending on how he got in. After the police took Everett, I cautiously entered my house. Thankfully, the damage was minimal. A living room chair fell, and some wall pictures were crooked. I found a few random items on the floor, but Everett didn't seem to have stolen anything. Ironically, he seemed to be moving in. The sense of violation was overwhelming. I locked and double-checked all doors and windows. Cheryl checked on me for a while. I didn't feel it until she left. Sitting on my couch, I couldn't believe that someone I'd known for nearly a decade as a distant colleague would break into my house with the delusional goal of taking it. I secured my home over the next few days. I replaced my garage door opener, installed a doorbell camera, and replaced my lock. Charlotte and the kids were appalled by the story, but grateful for the police intervention. My kids had a million questions about why Mr. Everett did that, so I explained in the simplest terms that adults get upset and do unreasonable things. Gabriel, about 10, said, "But that's our house. He can't take it," I said, promising not to let it happen. That bizarre incident leading to charges and a restraining order seemed like the end. I didn't know how the legal process would go. A detective called a few weeks later to finalize charges. They wanted to know how long Everett had been my neighbor and if there were any disputes. I said I'd never had a problem with him, other than him staring at my family. The detective also asked if I knew how Everett entered my home, or if a spare key was stolen. I had no idea. Everett probably forced a side door open or found a hidden key we used to keep near the backyard, which we stopped. A few months passed as the case moved through the system. I learned from the local prosecutor that Everett's attorney was considering a plea deal. If Everett pleaded guilty to criminal trespass, he could get probation and counseling. The more they investigated, the more evidence pointed to a more serious crime. He mentioned bringing personal belongings into my living room, as if he wanted to move in. That, along with threats of evicting me, made the situation worse. The legal path changed. I still had to see the empty house across the street. Everett hadn't paid his mortgage for months before the incident. The bank foreclosed on his property shortly after his arrest. It was empty for a moment, creating a surreal situation. I occasionally saw real estate agents inspecting the property to determine how to list it or if repairs were needed. Every time I looked that way, I remembered Everett's face peering through my door, telling me I didn't deserve anything. It's amazing how one event can change your view of your street. Over time, I learned more about Everett's personal life, mostly from secondhand sources. Financial setbacks reportedly plagued him. Several people said he had gambling debts, but I couldn't confirm. His relationship with estranged relatives was also complicated. Losing his job seemed to cause a domino effect of desperation. Still, I never thought he would try to take my home. The prosecutor asked me to testify about my experience during the criminal case. It might help show Everett's seriousness. I entered a courtroom on a cold morning. I hadn't seen Everett since he was handcuffed. The wrinkled collared shirt made him look messy. After meeting our eyes, he looked away. I recounted how I came home, found him inside, was blocked from entering, and listened to him rant about how the house was his during the hearing. The judge and attorneys asked if Everett had threatened me or demanded my departure. I explained that he didn't say he would hurt me, but he wouldn't open the door and claimed he was the owner, evicting me from my property. Prosecutors said Everett's attempt at illegal property possession and intimidation crossed a major line. Everett's attorney portrayed him as a man who had a mental breakdown due to stress and didn't know what he was doing. The plea of stress-related confusion didn't seem to sway the judge, especially since Everett had forcibly prevented me from entering my own house and chained the door. Since Everett's behavior was blatantly illegal and had caused me and my family great distress, the judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison. After hearing 3 years, I felt strangely relieved and sad. I felt relieved that he wouldn't be visiting my family for a while. I was sad because I had seen this person in the break room at work for years going down a dark road. After my sentencing, I tried to normalize. I focused on making the kids feel safe again with Charlotte. We took them to their grandparents for a week to escape our neighborhood. I replaced more home security features. I also reconsidered work-related personal relationships. I didn't want to be suspicious of everyone, but Everett's betrayal showed me how little I knew some of my daily contacts. Back at work, life continued. News of Everett's break-in spread quietly. Several co-workers whispered if the rumors were true. I just said Everett was arrested for claiming my property. Most were shocked. I even had some colleagues feel guilty for not helping him before he went crazy. I tried to convince them that Everett's choices were his own and that no amount of friendly conversation by the water cooler would have stopped him from crossing that line. The story continued after Everett's conviction. I later learned that he tried to file a bizarre legal document from prison claiming that my house's deed was fraudulent and that he was the rightful heir. It was made by him or a shady jailhouse friend. My lawyer said it was nonsense and unenforceable. Still, I had to ensure my deed was valid with the county records office. It took time, but it showed Everett's determination to believe this delusion. After Everett's house was foreclosed, a property management company took over. It looked bad. The lawn was overgrown and the mailbox was full. It was bought, renovated, and moved into by a family from another state. I love the new neighbors, and ironically, I get along with them better than Everett. I sometimes wonder if Everett could have deviated from this path. Maybe if he had sought help or confided in someone for his problems, or if the company had been more supportive of struggling employees. He made decisions that got him jailed. My employer gave me a small note for being a reliable team player that year. Manager praised my ability to stay calm under pressure and help my team meet deadlines. It was strangely bittersweet to accept. Part of me remembered Everett's claims that I never deserved anything. But I worked hard to get here, enduring layoffs, learning new skills, adapting, and persevering. I felt sorry for someone who lost their job, but that didn't justify breaking into someone else's house and claiming it. This incident also made Charlotte and me rethink our finances. We comfortably made mortgage payments, saved for a rainy day, and invested small amounts. However, Everett's rapid decline, losing a job, a house, and his freedom, showed that anything can happen at any time. Reassessing insurance policies, increasing emergency savings, and reducing debt were our goals. We also made a small career backup plan. That sounds paranoid, but after that fiasco, you realize life can change in an instant. I also noticed my kids grew up faster than expected. They discovered that not all neighbors are good. 8-year-old Mia requested a special door lock. Gabriel wanted house alarm setup instructions. That ordeal took away some of our innocence, but we learned about home safety and self-awareness. I also contemplated workplace dynamics. As the company grew, employees were under pressure to perform, sometimes to the point of breaking down. I checked in with some of my newer team members to offer advice, comfort them, or just listen. I wasn't worried about another Everett situation, just being decent in a cutthroat environment. After seeing the worst of unaddressed stress and isolation, I wanted to do my part, however small, to prevent it. I also established clearer work-life boundaries. Stop letting work neighbors look in my backyard or borrow tools without asking. If someone made me uncomfortable, I'd stay away. This experience led to a neighborhood watch group. The leaders heard everything. They were mostly informal before, but my situation organized them. They held monthly meetings, created an emergency phone tree, and invited a police community officer to discuss home safety. I was initially uncomfortable being called the guy who had that weird break-in, but it served as a warning to everyone else to be wary of suspicious behavior. Even if you know someone well, extreme stress can change their behavior. My in-laws' position was another subplot. They never liked our suburban lifestyle over a rural or upscale one. After hearing about the break-in, they pushed Charlotte and me closer. They claimed the area was full of unhinged people, ignoring the fact that this was a rare one-time event. Charlotte and I discussed moving many times, but we loved our home and the memories we made there. We refused to be driven away by Everett's delusions. My in-laws eventually gave in, but it took some convincing that we were taking every precaution. Life returned to normal despite the drama. My kids stopped asking about the scary neighbor returning. To revive the block's community, Charlotte started a weekly craft group for neighbors. And I spent more time in the backyard planting a small garden to bring some peace back into our personal space. The main storyline seemed to end when Everett was sentenced to 3 years after the trial. A year into his sentence, he sent me an unexpected letter. I received it in shaky handwriting at my office. It was my first instinct to throw it away without reading, but curiosity won, and I opened it. He apologized and justified his actions in the letter, which was disjointed. He wrote, "I realize now that my anger was misplaced, but you still have to see that the environment at our old job was toxic and you benefited from that while I suffered." He also said he wished he could turn back time but felt life was unfair. No clear remorse was expressed in the letter, but rather regret and bitterness. Declined to respond. Charlotte agreed that replying was pointless after seeing it. My team did well at our company. I kept my head down, worked hard, and tried to balance work and life despite department expansions and layoffs. I felt lucky to have job security when others were struggling. I didn't think the corporate world was fair, but I thought if you treated people well and worked ethically, you could look in the mirror. Sometimes I wondered if Everett would be better off if he had that perspective or sought help. I suppose I'll never know. My kid's long-term response is an interesting final storyline. Gabriel loved playing with the new camera system and programming the backyard sensor lights. Perhaps he'll work in engineering or cybersecurity later in life. Mia delved deeper into emotions. After learning that stress and isolation may have caused Everett's breakdown, she became a mental health advocate at her middle school. She started volunteering for local crisis counseling and outreach programs. I love that she turned trauma into a desire to help others. It shows that even in darkness, light can emerge. I occasionally glance across the street at Everett's house on Sunday mornings. The new family planted flowers along the walkway, installed shutters, and built a small deck in the back. It constantly reminds us how life can change. You can go from a comfortable job and a normal life to losing everything and making terrible decisions. One of the biggest lessons I learned was to never take your stability for granted or assume you know what's going on behind closed doors. On this journey, I also learned the importance of acting quickly when rights are violated. Had I not called the police, I can't imagine what would have happened. Everett might have had more time to do something riskier. Maybe it would have become a long standoff. I made the best decision in that confusing moment by trusting my gut and letting the authorities handle it. Sometimes you can't talk someone off the ledge if they're already destroying themselves. I'm glad Charlotte and the kids weren't home for the fight. I also appreciate the local police's firm but compassionate approach. Despite Everett's sad fate, I have no regrets about filing charges. He crossed a line that endangered my family's security, so there must be consequences. 3 years in prison is harsh, but I think it fit his crime. I've found peace in this house since then. Holiday parties, birthdays, and summer cookouts have been held here. The place is full of laughter and warmth, as expected. Charlotte chose turquoise for my front door, which ironically symbolizes progress. I added security by replacing the chain lock with a sturdy latch. I'll remember the day I tried to unlock my house but was rebuffed some nights when I lock up. It's a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. I close that door each night with a deep breath and resolve. No one should take our home, which we built for our family. Many people asked me if I wanted Everett to suffer or felt vindictive. My main emotions were shock, betrayal, and disappointment. I didn't want him to suffer, but I couldn't justify his actions. Even if you sympathize, you must hold people accountable for their actions. I won't always be positive. My wife jumps at unexpected door knocks, and my kids are hyper-aware of neighborhood activity. We manage those anxieties by restoring normalcy and taking practical security measures. The whole ordeal made us appreciate each other more and reminded us that possessions are replaceable, but loved ones are irreplaceable. Every day, I'm grateful that Everett hadn't been violent. In retrospect, I wish I had noticed his work frustration, possible depression, and suspicious neighborhood behavior earlier. Unfortunately, I wasn't close enough to read it. I could only do so much for someone who refuses help. People say, you never know what someone's going through. That's true, but it doesn't excuse endangering others. If Everett had told me his dire situation, I might have offered resources, job openings, or moral support, but he never did. He broke the law dramatically and intrusively. I remember looking at Everett in the police cruiser and feeling strangely sad. He once had a good job, a house across from mine, and a nephew he cared about. He lost everything due to pride, mental illness, or unchecked resentment. Misusing his anger on me wasted it. That wound may always be with me, but I now use it to warn friends and family about vigilance, empathy, and setting boundaries. Eventually, this brought 2 intangible benefits. I grew closer to my family and appreciated every moment. We also strengthened neighborly ties. I was surprised when some of them brought over homemade meals after the incident, offered to watch our house while we were away, and even stopped by on random evenings to check on us. It was encouraging to see community unity. I thought everyone was out for themselves, but this showed me that many people still care about each other, especially in a crisis. The new owners of Everett's former house knocked and shook hands hello. We were only asked to recommend a local plumber or electrician occasionally. My kids and theirs joined the local soccer league. We've shared stories and barbecue tips, and ironically, they told me they'd heard some rumor about the house's previous occupant, but didn't believe it until we confirmed it. Naturally, they were shocked, but they moved in. Their presence daily reminds us that good can replace bad. I eventually stopped thinking about Everett when I crossed the street. Healing is beautiful because your mind stops replaying the worst moments. However, some nights the memory returns unexpectedly. As I drift off to sleep, I'll remember pulling on my door and hearing Everett say, "I couldn't come in." This is a fundamental offense. Being locked out of your sanctuary haunts you. However, every morning I wake up in my house, go downstairs, and see my family safe around the breakfast table. I am grateful that the situation ended as it did. 3 years may have seemed harsh, but the judge took the violation of private property and the potential threat to my family's safety seriously. U.S. property laws are strict, and occupying someone else's home is a serious crime. Everett may have received a lighter sentence with a different judge. However, the legal system decided to impose a clear consequence due to his refusal to leave, the potential for violence, and his repeated claims of ownership over something that was never his. I often wonder if it woke Everett up, or if he retained more resentment. My role ended when the gavel fell. We own the house regardless of delusional paperwork or accusations. Charlotte and I kept digital and physical copies of everything related to the property. Our mortgage statements, deed, official documents, court transcripts, in case Everett or anyone else did something outrageous again. Thank goodness no more attempts were made. After being transferred to prison, he disappeared except for that letter. I don't know if he'll contact me after release, but I'll protect my family's boundaries. Retraining order stays in place, and I'll call the police if he tries again. Friends ask, do you ever see yourself forgiving Everett? I don't hold a grudge. I can move on. But forgiveness for me would require genuine remorse from him, which I never saw beyond half-hearted words in a rambling letter. Maybe time changes him. People mature and redeem themselves unexpectedly. I have no control over that. I must protect my family and avoid bitterness. I've also tried to teach my kids that feeling angry at him won't help us heal. It would keep us in fear, moving forward with lessons learned. Ultimately, this episode taught me that you can know someone for years without knowing their true nature. People should be treated with kindness and caution. We can't read hearts, and the line between a stable person and a crisis-prone one is sometimes blurred. The real key is to defend your rights and property when someone violates them. That's about your peace of mind, not just your belongings. If someone tries to take your house, you call the police, you ensure their punishment. Where would you go if you were bullied out of your home? How would that influence your kids? This house holds my family's memories, not just walls and a roof. My kids took their first steps there. I've shared countless meals with my loved ones. And Charlotte and I have had our share of fights and made up by dancing in the kitchen. It's filled with laughter and tears. So breaking in and claiming it was more than an invasion. The goal was to steal a lifetime of security and comfort. Thankfully, justice won. I'm glad the law recognized Everett's crime's severity. I hope he found clarity or therapy in those 3 years to move forward healthier. I don't wish anyone permanent ruin. I know I can't fix him or risk my family's safety by giving him the benefit of the doubt again. Finally, our neighborhood is good. The new neighbors are friendly, the community watch is active, and we are united. My wife's craft group has grown to a dozen or more crocheters and painters in our living room. My kids are doing well in school, making friends and exploring their interests. I occasionally share this story with close friends and family to emphasize the importance of standing up for what's right and watching out for others. If one person hears this story and realizes they need help and asks for it, Everett's chaos may have a positive outcome. I still believe that finding him in my house was terrifying, but a powerful reminder of resilience. My family and I overcame that challenge and are stronger. Finally, that matters most, because no matter the storms, we have each other and a home we built with love, respect, and honesty. Nobody, no matter how bitter or envious, can take that away. Friends, thank you. See you soon.